And with us now from the Aspen Security Forum is Delaware Senator Chris Coons. He sits on the Judiciary Committee and is chair of the Ethics Committee. He is also a Biden campaign national co-chair. Senator, thank you so much for being with us. I very much appreciate your time. Just wondering if I could
Great to be on with you, Jose. So much to talk about today.
We do indeed, don't we? And let's start with this president's potential Supreme Court proposals. What do you think of that?
Yes, well, I won't get ahead of what the president's going to announce in the coming days, but in the Senate on the Judiciary Committee, there is widespread concern among Democrats about the ethics and the transparency and the recusal practices of the justices. This was not always a sharply partisan issue, Jose. Just 2 years ago, Republican Senator John Cornyn and I led a bipartisan effort that passed the Senate and has been signed into law to require all federal judges, including the Supreme Court justices, to disclose any stock holdings or financial investments that might require them to recuse. This was after a series of stories, I believe, in the Wall Street Journal, suggesting that some sitting federal judges were not properly following existing ethics rules. In the last 2 years, we've seen more and more evidence that Justice Thomas has taken dozens of trips, accepted hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of gifts and of hospitality, and has failed to report them or to appropriately recuse himself. Questions have also been raised about Justice Alito and the appearance of a political favor in his actions at his home with flags. The larger point is that we have passed out of the Judiciary Committee the Supreme Court Ethics, Recusal, and Transparency Act. I'm urging that we take a vote on it on the floor so the American people can see where we are. One of the biggest pieces of former President Trump's legacy was he moved the federal courts, and in particular the Supreme Court, far to the right. They've stripped away a fundamental freedom, religious freedom, that Americans relied on for 50 years. But just in the last few weeks, they've also taken very forceful steps to defang or to depower or to reduce the capabilities of the administrative state, to make it, frankly, very difficult for federal agencies to protect our air and water, to improve and enforce workplace safety rules, to crack down on companies that sell unsafe products. There is a very wide range of federal agency regulations that, after very recent decisions by this conservative Supreme Court, will no longer be able to protect the average American. This is something that doesn't get a lot of coverage, Jose, and it's why President Biden and many of us in the Senate, in the Democratic caucus, are gravely concerned about the impact. President Biden has nominated, and we have confirmed, hundreds of judges, just over 200 federal judges. That's an important piece of the Biden-Harris legacy. But this is a hinge point in our history. If there is another Trump term, we won't recognize a federal judiciary and a Supreme Court that will move further and further to the right.
And so, Senator, all of that you talk about, and I'm glad you bring it up with such lucidity and details. All of this is not in the responsibility of members of the House and in the Senate to deal with this once the Supreme Court decides one way or another. In other words, an EO, I don't know what EO, executive order, could have any weight to it when it's what you and your colleagues have the responsibility to do.
Well, there's a number of things at play, and I'll try to be quick about this. As I just pointed out, 2 years ago, Congress did pass a binding ethics and disclosure rule that's a bill that's become law that every federal judge, including the justices, are now following. That puts to rest the argument that we can't legislate around ethics. Every federal judge is subject to a binding code of ethics, except the 9 justices of the Supreme Court. And after respectfully and repeatedly urging them to do so, we've taken up and passed through the Judiciary Committee a bill that would require them to do so if we could pass it into law. No Republicans support it. Every Democrat does. That lays out pretty plainly our views on the urgent consequences of the significant contributions that were made through super PACs to ensure the confirmation of several of the most conservative justices now serving and the ways in which money in politics facilitated this sharp right turn in the federal judiciary and the Supreme Court. Jose, it gives me no joy to have to make these points. As a practicing attorney, I would never 10 years ago have criticized our judiciary in this way. But bluntly, this is a moment of urgency. Critical decisions are being made by the Supreme Court and federal courts that are impacting the rights and freedoms of Americans. And President Biden and Vice President Harris are laying out a clear agenda to move us back in a more balanced direction to restore some of those freedoms. And President Trump and now his vice presidential nominee, new Senator J.D. Vance, who's been with us in the Senate 18 months, are making it clear, if you look at their plans and what's being said at the RNC, that they would take us even further to the right, using the power of the president and the Senate to nominate and confirm even more conservative, younger, longer-serving judges and justices.
Elections matter. NBC News, Senator, has new reporting that the president is tightening his circle. Gabe Gutierrez was talking about that just a minute ago, amid growing combative moments in reaction to these questions about his future. You're part of that inner circle. Is the patience of the president waning?
Well, the president is doing what everyone called on him to do in the days after the debate several weeks ago. He's campaigning and he's leading. I'll remind you, just in the last few weeks, he's campaigned in North Carolina, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Nevada. He's done small group and large group events. He's done press conferences. He's done long interviews. He's also not just the leader of the free world, he's leading the free world. Last week, Jose, we had 37 heads of state in Washington, and President Biden led session after session, meeting after meeting, to emphasize the importance of NATO, the investment in strengthening the fight for freedom in Europe, something Senator J.D. Vance has been one of the strongest voices against. And in the middle of that week, last week, he was also listening to and hearing from House leaders, mayors, governors, senators, caucuses. He is widening the circle of his campaign engagement, his leadership, and his work as president. So, you know, I hear you on the coverage, but frankly, President Biden is hearing from a very wide range of people, average voters, members of Congress, and world leaders in just the last few days.
So, Senator, just over the weekend, California Congressman and Senate candidate Adam Schiff spoke to donors at a fundraiser about Democratic prospects. If the president is still at the top of the ticket, he essentially said, if it's President Biden, I think we lose. What would you say to those people within your own political party who say, well, this may not be the most winning ticket?
Jose, I understand the widespread concern among some of my colleagues. I know Congressman Schiff and respect him and look forward to serving with him in the Senate. But poll after poll, nationwide head-to-head polls still show this within the margin of error in a head-to-head race. And bluntly, it's July. There are months left. I don't know of any candidate for president in modern history who, because the polls are moving one way or the other by a few points, abandoned their campaign for the presidency in July. I do know that President Biden has heard from lots of folks like Congressman Schiff and many others in my party and their concerns. We have a convention coming up in a few weeks after the Republican convention this week. President Biden is doing the things that my concerned colleagues asked him to do. He's doing long TV interviews. He's doing brief small group interviews. He's campaigning hard and is leading hard. I support Joe Biden. I am, of course, a campaign co-chairman. I've also been urging him to pivot and to change the tone. The tragic events of Saturday, where several folks were shot and one killed at a rally in Pennsylvania, and former President Trump was injured and nearly assassinated, give us a moment to reflect as a country and to look at what kind of tone we want. And Jose, the reality is it's Joe Biden who, from his inaugural, from his campaign, has campaigned on restoring the soul of our country and bringing us back together. That's the record that he and Vice President Harris have as leaders. He ran for the presidency because of the Charlottesville event where there were people waving Ku Klux Klan flags and neo-Nazi flags and screaming about not being replaced. That's what moves him, is to try and bring us back together, and he's got a strong record of doing so.
Senator Chris Coons, I thank you very much for being with us. We will continue our conversation in the days and weeks to come. I thank you for your time.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.